HiSec Buyback offers 90% JITA anywhere in HiSec. Simply go to hisec.evebuyback.com, appraise your items, create a contract, and get paid quickly.
Hi, welcome to Talking In Station. This is Matterall's December 10th, and we're going to go over some industry and market news, mostly in regards to the patch that just came out on Tuesday, but also we'll talk a little bit about the Nexus Christmas event, the Winter Nexus, it's called. So with me today, I'm happy to have Malclips. How are you doing, Mal?
Good. How's it going?
Good. Also with us today is from Ravworks, Ravindel.
Hello, hello. Thanks for having me.
Good. Let's start actually with a little bit of an introduction to Rav, because I wanted to show Ravworks. I gave a little bit of history before to a recording version of this. And what I had said is that Rav and I, first, I'm going to call you Rav because it's really easy. We met right before his website went out. And so we agreed to show his work to the public, and it's become very popular, which is great. This is totally on its own merits, but it was really nice to help him out to get a boost early on because it's such an endorsable product. So how have things been going with your website? Here it is.
That's been going really well. The introduction was really nice because it is a website that needs a little bit of a setup and a little bit of an explanation before you can really get started with it, more so than some other tools like Fuzzworks and stuff. But also, as a result, that you can do a little bit more with it. You can set it up once and then go and do a lot more things. A lot more industry jobs in one go, basically, without having to look at each individual aspect at once. But ever since the introduction during your stream, the grow has been spiked whenever there was another video. But every time I did see a slightly higher level of people actually using it. So it's been growing steadily. So it's really nice. Especially like it when I see people link it in between them, even though I don't actually know who they are. That's the true marker that it's actually useful.
Yeah, they don't know you're around, but you see them passing it on to one another.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's got to be rewarding. It's a great website. It's really kind of a staple. It's getting up there with Fuzzworks as a staple for industrialists and marketeers and people who want to figure out what to build and how many how much time it's going to take, how many resources it's going to take. All that kind of stuff is calculated in a very visual way, which is unusual for these calculators for EVE Online. Normally, your industrial calculators will be things that you plug in, and then you get a readout of how much to buy and where the cheapest price is and those kinds of things. But with your site, with Ravworks, you really get a visual representation of what it looks like.
Yeah, so that is basically made specifically because of the industry changes that they first started, where you needed to do 2 simple steps where you have minerals, then you have components, and then you have your capital ship. Now they made that way more complex, and also building battleships and other stuff is way more complex. So I wanted to figure out, partly for myself and partly for everybody else, how do I display this in a sort of reasonable manner, because it's added so much complexity. And as a result, I made what is called the tree viewer on the website, where whenever you want to type in an item, it shows you, okay, what goes into what. And also you can look at a little sub-chain and see, okay, what only goes into sub-chain and what part of the total material requirements is actually going into this sub-chain and what part is going to something else that is later on needed.
Yeah, here's a simple version of that. I think anybody who knows industry knows what this stuff looks like, so we won't dwell on it. But if you haven't, you need to check out ravworks.com and help yourself out. It's definitely a great place.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think Ravworks has become the standard industrial reference. What I use when I want to know a build cost for an individual item, it's what I see people referencing a lot. I mean, it really has become the go-to resource, and it's a great addition to the community, Rav. Thanks a lot for that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Okay, so Mel, we were going to talk about some of the stuff and how some of the market pricing and where trends were headed and that sort of thing. Let's just say right from the start, though, I don't know if you agree with me, but it's too early to tell what the major trends are for the patch that's come through. But maybe we can give some insight on where we think it's going to go and any indications that that's accurate by looking at some of the stats. But
Yeah.
you wanted to talk about Mercoxit. Why don't we start with you there?
Okay, so if we look at this Mercoxit price, and you see the trend is down in general, but if you compress it more, move that slider bar on the bottom over to the right, you can see there's been a sharp decrease in the price over the last couple of days. That is very likely a result of the patch. So I looked this up in the patch notes, and they doubled all ore quantities in celestial asteroid belts in solar systems. Mercoxit spawns in the belts, so that means they doubled the quantities there. And let's see.
Let's make one thing clear real quick. Mercoxit is the asteroid, but morphite is the mineral that you refine out of that asteroid. So when we say mining Mercoxit, we're actually saying the product you end up with is morphite, and that's what you would sell or trade.
That's right. Mercoxit is pure morphite when you refine it. And then they doubled the amount in the anomaly as well. So Mercoxit is by far the most valuable thing in an ore anomaly in nullsec. It's something like 70% of the value of that anomaly. And if you're optimizing for rate of return, you would either move from anomaly to anomaly and just get the Mercoxit. Of course, that could irritate your neighbors if you're doing it too much, or you would try to blast through the rest of the anomaly as quickly as possible in order to get to more Mercoxit, right? Okay, so the reason this stuff has responded so quickly to the patch is because Mercoxit compresses very well. It's a very bulky item when you're mining it, but it is very small once you compress it. And so that makes it very easy to move from nullsec to JITA, right? So this price could respond relatively quickly. But if you look at other things like, let's see, like you can see a more nuanced picture in other areas. Like if you look at Mexilon, for example.
Yep, I'm putting it up.
If we scroll up to get a more like, compress in the other direction, please, and you can see more clearly what's going on there.
Whoa.
No, I mean top to bottom.
Yeah, stretch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this price has been trending upward for the last couple of weeks. And it's not really clear to me why that's happening. You would expect that the price would start to fall once they double the amount of asteroids. Most of the Mexilon in JITA comes from HiSec, because if you're in Null, you have there are 15 other things you would mine before Arcanor and Bisto, which is where this comes from in nullsec. So the Rorqual changes aren't really going to affect this price. But I expect this price will fall in the coming weeks, but it just goes to show, though, you can never really predict. You can never really be sure. Because this price has been trending upward for the last couple of weeks. I don't really know why, and it could continue going upwards. It's the same story with Tritanium.
Yeah, well, the extra complexity with Mexilon is, of course, that Mexilon you used to be able, well, you still can right now, I think. But anyway, it also comes from the basic R4 Mungu ores, right? Where you get hydrocarbons and that sort of stuff. On the side, you also get some Mexilon and some pyrite. And then they said with the upcoming changes, what we want to do is remove those basic minerals from the R4 Mungus, which means that Mexilon will get removed from the R4 Mungus, which is probably part of why Mexilon's gone up in price. Not entirely sure how or why, because I think that patch was released on the 12th of November. And if you look at the 12th of November, it already was at its peak, and it's not really gone up much before, like the Devlog, I mean.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good theory. It could be related to like anxiety buying, because since they're talking about taking that stuff out of the R4s.
Yep.
You would think that R4s would be getting more use because that's where you get reinforced carbon and pressurized oxidizers, and you now need that for anything battleship size and up, right?
Yeah, and as a side product, you get the Maxlon and the Pyrite at the moment.
Yeah.
Um,
But the R4's place in the arcology, they're still working that out, right? I don't think it's where CCP wants it to be, as evidenced by the continued fiddling in proposals with what it's.
With the proposal that they wanted to add like bacteria and oxygen and water to it or something like that.
Yeah, they're talking about adding the lower tier planetary stuff, and people.
Yeah, which was quite controversial, let's say.
Yeah, it was controversial. I mean, that's one of the big complaints about the industry patch. People have said, well, I have to move so much of this low tier P1 stuff in order to make anything, and that's a hassle. I guess I have a different view on that. You can move P1 planetary stuff if you want to, or you can manufacture components on site and get a significant compression effect, which is especially noticeable for the capital core temperature regulator, which gives you a compression effect of like 10, like a factor of 10, right? So like if you're moving water by the freighter load in order to make a dreadnought or something like that, you might consider just making your capital core temperature regulator on the spot and moving that in a blockade runner, right?
Oh.
But the idea with putting the P1 into the moon was that then you're getting your R4 reaction materials and your low tier planetary stuff in the same spot, and then it's less of a logistical headache. But I guess the players didn't like that for whatever reason. It's not entirely clear to me, so they scrapped that and they said, all right, we'll just keep the Mexlon and the Pyrite in for now, but we'll figure something out. But over the long term, they do intend to take this out. They just haven't figured out how to balance the R4s correctly.
Yeah, and that's because such a large amount of them was needed for the capital, for the capital core temperature regulator you were talking about, which really has become the bulk thing that you need if you wanted to build a capital.
That's the choke point, right?
Which is also the reason that, so one of the things we've seen with this new change that was deployed last Tuesday is that they've reduced the amount of water you need for those core temperature regulators by half, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And they've also, on top of that, reduced the amount of P4 that you need for the capital components that go into the capital ship by about half as well. So in total, you need roughly half as much pi right now as you do to build a dreadnought than you did before, or to build a super than you did before.
Right.
Did they reduce that? Did they reduce the PI for both the normal version and the capital version? Did they both go down?
Well, the capital version is just a bunch of regular ones plus some P4. Yeah. So if you reduce the amount in the core temperature regulator, then you're like as a secondary effect, you're reducing the amount in the capital core. There's no water or bacteria or whatever just in the capital core by itself.
Yeah, exactly. So they had to reduce the water in the core one to actually have the same effect on the capital version. But as a result, the amount of pi that you need for the dreadnought, for example, has gone from, if I remember correctly, about 1 to 1.5 mil to about half that, so about 500 mil to 750 mil ISK roughly, which is a decent amount. It's like it reduced the total price for a dread by about 10% or so to build a new one right now. But the choke point for them still really is those capital core temperature regulators. And apart from the water, that really hasn't changed much yet.
And the thing to understand about the capital core temperature regulator is it basically has three parts. It has R4 reaction materials, P1 planetary, and then the Tier 4 planetary. But the R4 reaction materials is most of your expense there. The other stuff is like you have to have it to build the thing, but what's really making that stuff expensive is R4 reaction materials, reinforced carbon and pressurized oxidizers. So sometimes people will say it's the capital core temperature regulator. Sometimes people will say it's the R4
Yeah,
It's the same thing. It's the R4 materials goes into the capital core temperature regulator, and then you get the extra expense.
Suppose I can pull that up on the tree viewer as well. Show it a little bit. Oh, if we open up a revelation, it's a whole mess. But then if you go to specifically, where is it? Capital core temperature regulator. And here you see almost all of the R4 GOOS that you need are used into this capital core temperature regulator. Almost all of them.
That's ravworks.com.
Yeah, and so this is why I was saying, if you look at this graph for a moment, that you get you can get a significant compression effect by manufacturing this thing on spot, right? There's no reason that you need to move 5 or 6 freighters worth of water across your, nullsec or whatever. If you have a production facility, even a not very good one, on site, you can just make the capital core temperature regulator right there and move it in a DST or a whatever, You don't have to move like insane amounts of tier 1 planetary materials.
As long as you can get them locally, wherever you want to build. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's 28,000 cubic meters. You can't move it in a blockade runner, but you can in a deep space transport.
Yes. But, so yeah, that is the R4 aspect of this change. I think, so if you look at the market for, well, I guess where we started off is with Morphite. What you can see is there was this change in September where they already doubled the amount of ice available the first time, right? And they also doubled the amount of Morphite, Croxit available. And as you can see, there was this very quite large reduction all of a sudden in the price of Morphite, went down quite a lot. And then now what you see is this new patch has been gone into effect over here on, I think, the 6th here. And you see like Malaclips was saying, that we already see another smaller reduction. But compared to the reduction before, it's not that big yet, though might come along the way.
Yeah, I expect that price has a little bit further to fall.
Yeah. But in general, what is quite an interesting thing with these changes is, because the thought was, okay, if everybody doubles the amount of ore available, plainly of basically all ores available, so that is ice, that is Mercoxit, that is all the normal ores, but it's also R64s and so the really valuable R64s and everything else. Then what you get is, or what the premise was really, is that the R64s would go down in price, but because they're very high, because their value is from their scarcity, but they're doubled. Whereas the lower end materials, the R4s, for example, there were plenty of them anyway. They're just hard to get because you need a long time to mine them. So what the premise is that all the high value stuff will go down in price. R64s will go down in price, but to counter, because you now have more competition between this high value ore and the lower value ore, that then the lower value ore might actually raise up in price a little bit as a result. So, however, when you look at the market right now, for example, if we look at, what was it again? I think Promethium or something like that. So for example, at R64s. And then you see, okay, this devlog here was posted at, I think the 12th was where it was claimed that, or well, it was first posted that everything was going to be doubled. And then if you look at the price of Promethium since, well, there's no very obvious aspect in that all the R64 value has suddenly dropped since this new devlog. So in that aspect, it's like Malaclips said, it's really hard to predict where the value is actually going to go. Especially, another aspect of this is that, if I'm going too quick, by the way, just stop me. I don't know how easy it is all to follow. But so what we see anyway is the premise is, okay, everything is going to be doubled. So that means that all the stuff that is high value by scarcity is going to drop in value. So that would be the R64s like this Promethium that we're seeing here. But at least from the speculating aspect, where people were speculating on the devlog, We don't see that happening yet. At the moment, we only see, okay, the price is basically the same. Same story for the older R64s. So that's kind of weird, because you would expect, hey, they drop. Now, of course, they can only drop if there's a lot of stockpile of them left to sell. Otherwise, if nobody has any of it, then it can't drop in price. But the other aspect is also this new residue mechanic, or the mining waste, or the mining residue. And that means that, okay, if I have something that is really high value, then I can choose to either mine it really quickly and waste not half of it, waste like a third of it or a quarter of it. Or I can choose to get it more slowly with Tech 1 miners and not waste it, but then the total amount available is going to be higher. So when you think about that for a little bit, and this gets a little complex now because it's a second level analysis, I suppose. What it means is that while that push in effect pushes up the amount of the value of R64 again to a higher level, but when you're mining it more slowly. So that means that you don't get relatively as much of it as you would get of a R32, where you're maybe speed mining it and wasting some of it. So long story short, if the ISK per unit for Promethium remains the same, and you're actually mining it more, but you're mining it more slowly because you don't want to waste it, then in reality the ISK per hour might still drop a little bit from that aspect.
Well, it sounds like the general tendency based on that analysis would be to flatten the prices across the different rarities of moons. But then again, if some of these...
Well, yes and no. It would flatten it in the ISK per hour for a miner, but it won't flatten it in the actual ISK worth of the unit, like of actual 1 unit of Promethium versus 1 unit of hydrocarbons, for example.
Well, if more of the Promethium is being exported to, typically you would react with nullsec before you export it to highsec, right? Yeah. So that's another whole other layer we have to consider.
True. But anyway, what the story tells you is it's become a little bit more complicated, because now whenever you're looking at the price of something, you have to think, okay, but how quickly do I mine this one versus this other thing? Because one of them I can just speed mine and waste some of it, and with the other one I want to grab everything, so I want to mine it more slowly. That's the extra complexity here.
Right. So on the one hand, you're talking about the price of the item. Is it worth selling? On the other hand, you're talking about, is it worth harvesting? Is it worth your time? Is it your best return on time?
Yeah, exactly. And a miner is going to care mainly about his return on time, I would imagine.
So we can imagine at least some negative consequences for the overall ecology of the game from this. See, it's already the case that there are more moons in nullsec than they can really use, right? I mean, a lot of that space is not really that valued. The space that a lot of these larger alliances control, significant amounts of it are rented out. And the moons that they do control, so there's significant waste, right? And so now we just doubled the amount that you get from the moons. So you need fewer moons to keep up the same level of production, right? And I think part of the reason we're not seeing as much fighting in nullsec as I guess people would like is because there's not that economic incentive to fight. I mean, if you're already sitting on more moons than you can use, why would you invade your neighbor to get their moon, right?
Yes, and that is, I agree with that in largely, especially that now the R64s, because you're going to have to spend more time on it if you actually want to get all of it. That means that it's less lucrative to do again because your ISK per hour goes down on them. So yeah, in that aspect, yeah, you would see that an R64 would be less desirable to have relatively to other moons.
Right. So we've been talking about in the Discord, this idea of the poverty or scarcity breeds conflict. Is that accurate? Why does EVE seem like a lower stakes affair now than it did in the past? I mean, I would argue that a part of that reason is it's not that there's it's not abundance in general or low prices in general. It's the overabundance of rare moons in particular, right? If the moons are your strategic asset in nullsec and you're already sitting on more than you can use, then you might fight your neighbor for other reasons, but not to get their moon, presumably. So it's that particular area of the ecology rather than prices generally does seem to be leading to stagnation.
Right. So I was looking at this graph, and what I see after the announcement is goes down, goes up, goes back down. It seems like people don't have a consensus as to what's going to happen, at least with this R4 here. Is that Prometheum? Yeah.
Yeah, it's R64, the high value one.
64.
Yeah. Can you hit like Dysphoria, like DYSP? Just take a look at a second one.
It's about the same.
Yeah.
People really don't know what's going to happen with it yet.
There's no consensus, right? So people who are looking to us for financial, where to plug their money, what to buy, what's going to go into shortages, there's no consensus right now.
No, but that's a little bit like I was saying. On the one hand, you have, okay, all the resources are going to be doubled. The high value stuff should go down in price to R64s. On the other hand, you have this mining aspect, mining residue aspect.
Where's
now,
the labor go? Right.
Yeah, exactly. Which means that if you actually want to get all of the high valuable stuff, you have to put in more labor, which then again drives the value up for the high valuable stuff. So it's like you got two counteracting forces really, which might mean that the price basically remains the same on a unit of dysprosium.
Let me take a second to grab a question from Valamir. He says, so do moons have a decision factor, or do they all have the same stuff?
In what aspect?
Two separate things there. Each moon has a unique composition of ores that are in its class, right? So like if you look up moon mining on Eve University, says you get loperite, monazite, xenotime, etc. from the R64s, and each particular R64 will have a different percentage of the various ores that compose it. Okay, that you don't get a choice about that. It's baked into the moon. But then you set up your moon mining platform, your Athanor, and you can calibrate the big laser that it uses to rip out chunks of the moon to give you a chunk with different properties. I think you can calibrate for size, you can calibrate for duration before the moon chunk disintegrates, and I'm not sure exactly what all the levers you can pull are there. I'm not a moon miner, but you do have some choice about how the ore comes out, but you don't have a choice about what its composition is.
Yeah, I've asked him to rephrase, but the decision factor, what's that mean? Like what, in other words, what are the factors that people take into account when they decide where to put their labor? Like, should I do R64? Should I do R4s?
Yeah. In general, it's always been that, they're labeled R4 to R64. And whenever you go up an R level, it tends to be more valuable to mine and to have because it's more limited in the availability.
Yeah, the R stands for rarity. So
yeah, exactly.
The higher the rarity.
If you have an R64 next to an R4 and you can mine either one, you're way better off mining the R64 and then importing the R4 material than like vice versa, right?
Right.
Yes.
Which is one of the problems, because one of the factors in mining moons is that it actually takes physical, real life labor, right? You have to sit there and do it. You might do it with 10 or 12 barges or exhumers or whatever, but you still have to sit in that chair and do it. And that alone it's the same. I can't cheat that process from any other miner. So one of the problems with balancing moon rarity and price and all that stuff is if everybody just wants the rare stuff, then nobody's mining the cheap stuff. R4s don't get mined because nobody wants to use that same labor hours towards those, very common moons. And so that's why they've infused those moons with, right now, extra minerals to give you more incentive to mine those things. They've also put them everywhere, including HiSec. That wasn't always the case, but those R4s are there now. So I think that's the idea.
The interesting aspect about that is, though, a little bit of where you said, okay, I have to choose as a miner. Do I want to mine an R64 or do I want to mine a lower level one? In that aspect, you typically always want to mine the higher level one. But when you make the comparison between HiSec and not HiSec, there might be quite a difference there. So because in HiSec, you only have the lower level R4 moons, but you can do essentially what is named as AFK mining, either in an Orca or just being very low attention with retrievers and that sort of stuff. And in that case, you have to think, okay, is 1 hour of mining in HiSec actually the same effort as 1 hour of mining in nullsec or Wormhole space or lowsec? because in nullsec or space lowsec, you probably have to be quite a bit more attentive to not lose your ship all of a sudden.
Mhm.
And just to dive into that a little bit, because if you haven't done Orca mining or moon mining, you might not have this context. But Orca, at least pre-patch, was not a particularly good miner. Like every barge just outclassed it on just a meter cubed per second basis. But it had some real advantages if your primary concern was how much attention do I have to pay to this thing. It can be tanked up to something like 250,000 EHP, which is getting up to about a freighter. It can be killed in high sec, but it's a lot of work, and you're like 95% invulnerable as long as you're not in a few key dangerous systems. So it's not very risky. And also you set your drones on the rock that comes from the moon, and these are like very large asteroids. They're much larger than what you find in the belt. So I don't remember the exact number, but your drones can just sit on that rock for hours and hours without requiring any additional input from you. And by the way, you have an ore hold of something like 150,000 cubic meters, if I remember correctly, and not very efficient drones trying to fill it up. So you could just set one Orca to mine one moon rock and let it sit there for hours. And if you can do that with one, why not 3? Why not 5? Why not 20? Right? And that's the
if you're
problem
invulnerable
with AFK
and
Orca
AFK.
mining. It's not what happens in the asteroid belts.
Well, by the way, I think that Orca mining in that fashion is no longer a good idea in normal belts. Like, it's just too slow and not even worth it. And if you're using the core, it slows you down as far as being able to reposition and that sort of stuff. But I've heard moon mining with an Orca is still something that could be considered. As long as we're going to talk about this for a second, it's just a little side note that one of the drawbacks of the changes that have come through is that I don't know if I can explain this well, but a mining friend of mine, Khan, explained that the changes were not good for solo miners or young miners that were trying to hang out with groups. Because the people that this patch really works for are the people that have mining gangs, multiple friends that are all mining together with a booster, or people that could do the same thing alone, meaning multi-accounts and boosting themselves with using exhumers and then using a capital ship to boost. Like, those two groups are good in this. They're mining faster and getting more. But the miner that only has one account or is not trained that well used to be able to crawl into an Orca and kind of like keep up with everybody else. But now they're not going to be able to do that as well, since they can't multi what do you call it? Multi-box. I think that's what we call it. So that was something that was going to be a little discouraging to people that were kind of hanging out with mining groups. And I just wanted to put that out there. All right.
Well, so I'm not entirely sure, but I saw somewhere that they are going to change the Orca again, I think.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Mining drone amount to basically the same as pre-patch.
Can I give some more specific information about that? And they released the patch notes a couple of days ago, but then the next day they released a number 2 patch notes, a very small edit. But in that patch notes, one of the things they did was they gave an Orca an additional bonus to its mining drone amount. It went up to like from 3% to 5%, something like that.
Okay, and there's also a proposed change, I think, in addition to that. I don't know if the change is made yet, but it's something that was put out. I just saw
I saw somewhere a post with like CCP Psych, I think, saying that it went to about that after that particular patch that we're talking about right now, the Orca will go up to in mining speed again to about the same amount that it was pre-patch, plus or minus 2%, something like that.
Right. I'll put that link in chat right now and leave it with show notes as well.
Yeah, I found the patch notes. It says drone ore mining yield 15% per skill level increase from 10%. And then ore ice harvesting cycle time 5% per skill level increase from 2%. So doubled and then some the amount for ice, and then they had 50% increase from that for ore, and that was like the day after
Okay.
the other patch, the big patch that we've been talking about, Len,
Yeah.
live. There's one other thing about the
You're
Orca
right.
I want to
Actually,
mention.
you're
Can you pull up the price for heavy water, please?
Sure.
Yeah, this was 3 days ago. So your information and mine are the same.
Oh, yeah, if water spiked up.
Yeah, that's because the industrial core that you now need for the Orcas and work walls requires heavy water, and you need that in order to get your most of your bonuses. So heavy water, which is traditionally kind of a waste product, can you expand the whole graph?
Yeah, vertically.
Well, expand it horizontally, I mean, so we see a whole year.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
So, so this suffered from the general kind of scarcity that has been affecting ice products for the first half of the year, and then it starts to steadily trend down. It doesn't jump around the time of the happy evacuation from. Do I have my chronology right? There's a double spike for some of the other items. Well, anyway, this stuff is typically oversupplied for markets. You get it as a byproduct when you refine most of these ice ores, and you do use it for making fuel blocks, but not in very large quantities. So this is kind of an underutilized resource. But now that you need it to make your Orca or your work wall function properly, it's all of a sudden a hot property. A lot of the secondary markets, like Dodixie and Heck and so on, were just totally cleaned out of this stuff within a day of the patch coming in.
Yeah. So this is fuel for that industrial core that Orca and
That's
Bork will use.
Oh. Yeah, so the interesting aspect about the AFK, well, let's call it AFK, the Orca mining anyway, where you can put your Orca on a big rock and you essentially go to sleep, or you look away for 2 hours and then you come back and it's full or something like that, right? The interesting part of that is, okay, so you can do that, but you can only do that in ISAC. At the same time, there is the R4 moons, which are only available, well, is the only moon that is available on ISAC. And at the same time, those R4 materials are the ones that you will need to build your capital core temperature regulator that you need for your dreadnought, which is the choke point item for any capital. So what I imagine is likely going to happen is that the Orcas, the Orcas doing that sort of quote unquote AFK mining on R4 moons in ISAC will become the core force that will eventually make capital manufacturing available again.
That seems plausible. There's a disconnect right now between the R4s and the capitals, which is that I think the way that CCP intended this to work is that you mine the R4, and the fact that you need it for capitals adds values to the R4s, and so you get this, trade between high sec, where the R4s are, and null sec, where people are building these capitals. Problem is that people aren't building capitals, so they don't need the R4. Right? The buyers and sellers have a long way to go yet. I mean, there's no reason to fire up a new Athanor on a new R4 when people aren't buying that stuff anyway. Right?
True. Same story is with a lot of this stuff, like for example the PI changes, where they halve the amount of PI materials required. Well, the PI isn't really being used yet much because the capitals aren't being really built yet much. So as a result, you can make a PI change, but the effective amount actually desired of that PI, it's not going to change much yet, simply because those capitals aren't built.
Pi is PI, which is planetary interactive materials. Those are mining. Right. Those are materials from mining planets. Right.
Yep. If I may finish it 1 second. What is interesting though is that when you see with some of those. So if we look at my website again, let me pull it up. And then we go to planner, stocks and materials. So if you look at, okay, this is everything, all the base materials for a full chain production of a dreadnought. What do I need in planetary interaction? stuff, then you see that over here mostly. And what you see is, okay, for the high-level PIs, the main value is in the wetware mainframes, the self-harmonizing power cores, and the integrity response drones. Need like 170-something mil of each. That used to be about double before this recent change. But anyway, what you see is those are the main ones that you need. And if you look at the price on them, then you see, hey, since this dev block has been announced, which I think is on the 12th over here, then you see, hey, there's all of a sudden there's this quite a decent drop in the amount of
Can you
in the
zoom
value
in?
of those.
Can you zoom in on that drop? I want to see if it timed right or if somebody got advanced
Uh,
information.
I think the dev block was here or here,
Maybe
something like that.
was going through a natural dip anyway, but it did start to move
Possibly, yeah.
before the announcement of what was in there.
Yeah. True. Who knows?
So-
Maybe some inside information. Who knows?
Maybe. So the point here is that because you're going to need less of this self-harmonizing power core to build your dreadnoughts, there's going to be less demand pressure on this.
Yeah.
More supplies.
So that means exactly. So that means that either people are already building capitals to some extent, and as a result, the reduction in demand has reduced the price, or more likely, it is people trying to stock up already on these biomaterials for the future. And they think, okay, well, now in the future, I'm going to need less of them, and that's reduced the price.
Yeah, I guess I have a little bit different interpretation of these graphs. The general trend for P4 planetary materials is down over the last month or so. There are basically three things that these resources go into. They're most of the expense for making an upwell. They're a significant part of the expense for making a deployable. Like every mobile tractor unit contains, I think, 2 wetware mainframes and an organic mortar applicator, if I remember correctly. They're used for the mobile cynosural beacons. Any kind of deployable you put in space other than one of those little containers typically uses at least one of these P4 planetary things. So, and then when they introduced the BPO changes, they put it into the capital ships, right? Like if you want to make a capital propulsion engine, you need 1 or 2 P4. If you want to make the capital doomsday weapon mount, you need 1 or 2 of another one. And so, and that's where you see that effect in the graph that Rav pulled up a moment ago, right? Where you're looking at all those different P4 items. It's for the modules in particular, the capital modules. So people weren't really building that many capital ships beforehand. So if you think that's true, then it follows that capital building was not a significant input to these prices beforehand. But they were building at least some of the upwells, but not all that many, it seems, because the demand is slackening off. And I've seen that just in my own sales. I mean, I build these structures and they're not, at least in my area, not selling like they used to. And then you're not seeing as much consumption of the mobile tractor units and things like that also. So I think it's related to declining player activity. I think that's part of the explanation for these P4 materials price slides.
All right. Well, I mean, the big question is, are dreads going to be less expensive? That's what people want to know. Such a space gator there.
The answer is this patch will certainly help. 100% certain.
Yeah.
How much and how long it's going to take is a little bit of a question. Especially the R4 based stuff with the capital core temperature regulator, and therefore your R4 moons in HiSec with Orca mining, etc.
Right now, I think they sell for about 7 billion, or sorry, they're manufactured for about 7 billion. And
roughly, yeah.
Yeah, we asked a few people, like, what's a good price point for a dreadnought? What would you like to see it at? And most people came out with like a 4 to 5 billion ISK per dreadnought would make it feasible, but not too feasible. You guys agree with that, or?
You're going to be paying that for the capital core temperature regulator.
Right now you are, yep. Would I mean, it's hard to say because like it's a little bit the question of how are people if a revelation is 8 billion to build, people will think 4.5 billion is a good price. If they were 4.5 billion to build, they would think 2.5 billion is a good price. So yeah, it's hard to say what is like objectively a good price. Do I think they're too expensive right now? Yes.
You think this patch will help?
Yeah, okay. That as well.
All right. Mal, is there other areas that you wanted to tackle that we were looking at before we wrap up?
If we could just look at the isotope prices real quick. I think these all tell basically the same story. They've all dipped over the last couple of days. This is again because the quantities of ice in the game have doubled, and isotopes are quite simple to move.
Oh.
So you always have to look at the transportation cost involved in moving this stuff as well. It's not just a matter of how much there is, it's how easily can I get it from where it is to where I want it. So for example, if the last time I checked in R10 TAC-GN, which is the central market system for PandaFam, strontium clathrates were selling there for about 2,000 ISK per unit. If I go to JITA, it's selling for about 3,000. If I go to Renz, it's selling for about 5,000. Well, it's because the stuff is a pain to move, right? So, and that's just one example of a more general market factors that when you want to understand prices, you have to look at not just at what it is and how much there is of it and what it's used for, but how easily can it be transported around. Yeah. So with the things that are reacting the most quickly to these changes are things that are easily moved, like morphite and isotopes, because like isotope is what, 1/100th of a cubic meter per unit, I think, 3/100ths.
Yeah, it's low compared to strons.
Yeah, you can move this stuff a lot easier than tritanium, I'll tell you that. So, so you have to be aware of that as well when you're, trying to bet on the future direction of markets. How easily does this stuff travel from where there's too much of it to where there's not enough?
Yeah, and I believe that's where compression will come in handy down the road. Go ahead.
Well, the betting on what's going to happen in the future is really hard, partly because the changes have been updated so live. It's like, okay, the first they said one thing, and now they're on iteration 4 or 5 of whatever they were planning to introduce, which is also what makes speculating really hard. And on top of that, just the nature of the changes makes the speculating really hard, because you have, on the one hand, everything is doubled, which makes the high valuable stuff less valuable. On the other hand, you have the residue mechanic now, where you don't want to waste high valuable stuff, so that makes it more valuable. So because you have to mine it slower, etc. So it's really hard to speculate on what is actually going to happen to the price of different things right now.
Just as some additional evidence for that, CCP does not believe that they can correctly forecast the direction of the ecology and things like that. That's why they have these very small incremental patches, typically, not always, but typically, because they don't believe that they can sit back and analyze the system and correctly predict beforehand. And they have way better insight into the game than you or I do, right? So, that should make, I think, anyone think twice about taking big speculative positions.
Yeah. And let me just remind people that when you read or hear people saying like CCP doesn't play their own game, they don't understand what they're doing, that's all hogwash. The players don't understand either. They understand their gameplay. So whenever they're saying that, they're saying the devs don't play my game style. They don't do what I do. And but they're doing something else. For instance, if a dev is in the game and he's actually putting different skins on their ship and flying around JITA, is that playing EVE Online or not? It is. But that's not what people are saying when they say the devs don't play the game and they don't understand things. They're saying my gameplay, which they can't predict. Players can't predict this kind of stuff either. So
We were talking the other day with, I think, a Rorqual pilot who was saying, I am 100% sure that the CCP devs have never sat in a Rorqual, because if they did, they wouldn't do me like this. They wouldn't take my toy away. And I thought about that for a second. I think what actually happened is that they did sit in a Rorqual, and then they sat in every other mining ship, and they realized how useless all the other mining ships were compared to the Rorqual, and that's when they decided to, that just like confirmed them in their view that the Rorqual needed to be pared back. But if you're a player, though, let's say that you're a Rorqual miner, how often have you sat in an excavator or a barge, right? You don't do it that much because you know that the Rorqual is the better choice. Well, if CCP devs know the same thing, their interest is not in maximizing your ISK per hour sitting in a Rorqual. Their interest is in diverse gameplay. So they would make the opposite decision based on the same knowledge that you have, right? It's not a matter of them not knowing things, not necessarily. It could be a matter of having different objectives when it comes to making these changes.
Also, that player started in 2016, so their view of what money is in the game is kind of skewed. I gave that person an example of my own situation in real life, where I live in Los Angeles, and this whole city was really built in the last 150 years. And, so it's a great city by the beach with the desert behind us. It's like Tatooine is right behind us. It turns out you could put a city here because we were in a rare 500-year wet cycle, and now we're headed back into a dry cycle. So this whole place is going to turn back into desert. But we thought it was a great place to put a city down because it was like an oasis. Well, turns out that was a temporary time. And the reality of this area is you're not supposed to live here. So it's kind of like if you come in at 2016 and you see what everybody's doing and you see the amount of money that's coming in and what you can actually accomplish in a very short amount of time, that's how you're calibrated to say that's normal. So now we're headed back into a healthier lifestyle, basically, for EVE Online, and that looks painful.
CCP has put out a lot of updates and revisions and different explanations about what they're doing with this from extraction to production update. But one thing they've been consistent on is the Rorqual. Every time this comes up in the patch notes or in an interview or whatnot, their discussion of the Rorqual is, here's the reason why we have to change it. They've never walked that back. They've adjusted a lot of other things, but not that. And it's in these patch notes too. There's a little insert where they explain that they had to change the Rorqual because it's oppressing other miners. And so the fact that they keep doubling down on their explanation of that, to me, is a strong indicator that a lot of things are negotiable in this patch, but not that. They're not going to back down from that, I don't think.
Yeah, but on the other hand, though, I think a lot of the player base, to some extent, also agrees, though. Because when you look at what the backlash was about, it certainly wasn't, well, as far as I can tell, it wasn't really about the Rorqual nerfs, but it was more about the way how they did it, where they added something and then removed something at the same time.
Yeah, the incentivizing cycles and the stick and the carrot and all that kind of stuff. And they even complain about the messaging too, like you message this wrong. And I think a case can be made for all that stuff. Yeah, sure, it's true. But
Also,
but I think at the end of the day,
I think a lot of these players have a legitimate grievance about the way the last year or so of the game has gone, is that, you can take away my toy and like I could live with that if I'm getting something else. Give me some new ships. Give me something to be excited about. If you're just going to club me over the head over and over and over again, then I got to ask myself, like, why do I keep coming back for the abuse? But I'll take a little bit of a beating in one part of my gameplay if I got something else fun to do in another area. But since the triangle invasion thing wrapped up, there hasn't really been anything like that. We keep doing these basically the same event, and that's great. That's a money-making opportunity, but it's not super like exciting. I mean, I've seen the same event like 9 times over the last 2 years, right? So, I wish they would introduce a new ship, introduce some new mechanics, a new feature, do something, to take people's minds off of how much the of the gameplay that they've been accustomed to over the last 2 or 3 years, how much of that is going away? I think players would be more forgiving if that were the
It's like
case.
that Indiana Jones thing where you replace the sack of sand with the statue that you're trying to steal.
Yeah, that's right. You
And
got to have
CCP
that.
rolls a big
stack of
rock
sand.
down after you.
Yeah. Otherwise, the big boulder comes after you. You know?
Yeah, and you fall into a pit of spikes. And okay,
Yeah.
I got your message. Rav, you're looking at industry all the time. What do you think of these changes, and where do you think we're at?
Ooh,
Tough one, huh?
yeah, it's a very general question.
Yeah.
No, well, what I perhaps don't like, well, I start with the negative part, in my opinion, and that is that doubling after all the ores means that all the really valuable ores are also doubled, which means that having an R64 and something really valuable to fight about is going to be less of an incentive. I would much rather have it that that aspect going into the other way, where they're like really valuable and you really want to fight about them. Apart from that, though, this general doubling of resources in that stuff becomes more available and people can actually start mining again. And I've actually seen a lot of my people in my corp start mining again in all sorts of places, either being in Morphite or being at just ice, etc., etc. Like, you do see a positive activity in that there's more and more of that going on. So that is certainly a positive note, especially after the industry changes that made some stuff a lot more expensive to do. The reduction in pi is the reduction in pi needed for capitals is certainly a good thing. There was a planetary interaction. Some people like it, but it's not the most engaging gameplay, and you needed so much of it. It is quite
But do you see what they're doing for the last patch and this patch is they're stretching out the amount of ingredients needed for a ship, and they're stretching out the way that harvesting works and making various different dials that they can change so that they can make adjustments to the economy. And we can see this because they changed pi, as you call it. They didn't change mineral requirements, and it only affects capital ships and battleships, because they have created that space for themselves to tune the price of dreadnoughts and carriers and capitals and battleships without affecting everything else too much.
No, that's fair point. Yeah, that is. I remember that was one of their goals to set out, that they would add these levers that they can adjust, so to become an ecosystem that they actually are happy with. And in that aspect, they certainly accomplished with what they wanted to do. I think a lot of people are still not entirely happy with where the capital industry market is at, partly because the issue with it really is still the amount of stockpiles that still exist from way back when, especially when you look at supers and titans compared to normal dreadnoughts. Because dreadnoughts, when you look at how much they've increased in price, they've gone up by, I think, about fourfold or something like that, from roughly 1 bill to...
Ooh, yeah, they were 1.2 billion.
Something like that, yeah, to 4 and a bit or 5. Whereas
that's just to buy, not to build.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's all to buy. Yeah. Whereas when you look at to buy a super, I think it is roughly 35 or something, or 40 bill right now, and it used to be about 15 or so, I think, in a lot of places.
Again,
so that's only
15
gone up by about 2 and a bit.
For all of Eve's history, when the Super was out, it was 25. It was about 25 to 30 billion to sell and fit. I mean, to buy and fit. It got down to about 20, and it was stable for a long time. Then 2016 kind of came around. Things changed. It got all the way down to 14, 12 billion to buy the hull. So about 14 or 15 to fit it out and stuff. So we were at 25. We came down to 12 because abundance. And now we're back up at about 30, 35, would you say?
Yeah, 35, I believe, something like that. So they've definitely gone up by like 2 or 3 fold, but dreads have gone up by about 4 fold. So they're still lacking behind relatively, which means that the capital market for dreads and stuff is going to recover before the capital market for supers and titans is going to recover.
Right. And you want those dreadnoughts out there because those are the super capital ship killers. That's how you kill a super capital, with dreadnoughts normally.
Yes. Of course, you also need something that makes it worth putting a 100 bill or 80 bill super on grid for, but that's another story.
Right.
Yeah, I think also you have to, if you think about the larger ecology of Eve, not just the extraction and production in the market, but also the military aspect. If you're a large group in nullsec, your strategic asset, the thing that keeps you there and that gives you, power, is that is your ability to escalate, hopefully all the way up to a Titan if you have to do it. But now that you can't replace those, if you pull the trigger, if you escalate all the way up to your maximum capability and lose, you're out of the game. At least that part of the game, right? So you're going to you really need to think twice before putting those on the field. And that means I think you're going to see less conflict between these groups, because it's not just that the suicide dread pilots can't afford their loss, it's that nobody can afford their loss, right? Why would you go to war under a condition like that?
All right. We have someone taking the opposing position, Demosin, that I've heard a lot, actually. And there's a whole lot to kind of counter. But his whole thing is more ships, more action, more combat out there. Battleships shouldn't cost as much as they cost now. He's saying they're about 300 to 350 million. But that's the same price they were before, right? They were 300, 350 million before before the production patch. And now it's too early to tell, but they're basically the same price as they were before.
But you don't use battleships to prosecute wars. You use battleships to run level 4 missions and to bash structures. You use hacks to fight sovereignty. Heavy assault
possibly
cruisers.
Ravens are involved in a lot of structural takedown stuff, but the point is that the T1, the battleships, the Tech 1 battleships and below have not really changed in price. In fact, they've gotten cheaper. It's a lot cheaper now to wage war with Tech 1, if that's what you want to do, a war of attrition, basically. But if you want specialized ships, which are T2 ships, those have gone up in price. Those will come down a little bit, won't they? Or they will in the future.
Tech 2, I think, actually has not gone up in price much, because Tech 2 hasn't changed
touched,
with
right?
industry changes. Yeah, exactly. And in fact, with the faster mining that we're going to get, with at least, well, when you're talking about subcap mining, so non-workable, and also the more availability of the moons with all the doubling of the R64s and stuff, you're probably actually going to see that the Tech 2 stuff is going to get cheaper than it has been.
Yeah. By the way, battleships have been 300 million since Tierside, which was a while ago, right, when they did the rebalancing. So battleships haven't been 150 in years.
Nope.
Anyway,
they were at one point. Yeah.
They were at one point, yeah. Faction battleships, I meant to ask you this, or faction ships in general, Rav, are they going down in price?
Not yet. Well, depends.
All right, let's look.
It's the best answer.
Depends is the best answer. I like it.
So it's probably a little bit hard to see here. But if you look at some of the faction battleships here, for example, so over here we have the Nestor up to the Nightmare. You can see, okay, their price is quite high right now. So for example, Nestor's 1.4 billion is to buy. If you build them right now, you're actually still making a loss on them. And similar story with stuff like a Barghest, Vindicator might be slight profit, etc. So all the faction stuff is still really expensive. And when you're looking at that, so if you're looking at, okay, well, why is a Nestor like 1.4 bill to build or something like that? Because those have certainly gone up in price a lot since the industry changes. And that is actually, let me open up the tree viewer first. So if you look at the tree viewer for a Nestor, what you can see is what you need mainly, or one of the things that you need, are these faction-specific components that we're over here. And these are made from some exploration loot But the exploration loot is really quite cheap, and it is really quite cheap because these ships aren't really being built at scale yet. So the exploration loot part is really quite cheap. But what you also need to build this thing is this Neuralink stabilizer stuff and Neuralink enhancer, which needs quite a lot of mycosarosin. And mycosarosin is known space gas. So that is the gas that you used to be able to make drugs with and that sort of stuff. Implants, I'm not sure, but at least drugs. And we look at the Nestor and go to the materials to build one. What you will see is, hey, out of my 1.5 billion ISK in materials that I need, about 200 mil, another 200 mil, another 200 mil, and 150 mil. So almost, actually over half, almost 800 million ISK of my 1.5 billion ISK build cost goes into this mycosarosin gas that I need, that then in turn goes into my into my faction specific component. So that is so here you have to use the Neuralink trigger unit, and you can see, okay, here we need the malachite mycosarosin and the lime mycosarosin. So that is the stuff that is really valuable of the Nestor. And yes, they will sort of get cheaper because again, they doubled the amount of a lot of things available, including this gas. So the gas is way more available. But one of the bottlenecks for gas mining when it comes to both, well, certainly in wormhole space, though this is not wormhole space gas, but also with normal gas is it's a pain to haul around. And one of the things that they wanted to change initially and are now going to change early next year, I believe, is the ability to compress gas. And once that is in, we can hopefully see that this gas is going to be quite a bit cheaper because it's going to be easier to haul and get out of the belt. And then also the faction ships will probably become a bit cheaper again as well.
Well, they've added another element that should help ease the supply restrictions there, which is now we have gas harvesters, which are
Yes.
You fit on a barge and it turns your barge into a gas harvesting platform. It used to be that all the gas was mined with a venture, not a particularly potent, mining platform. And then they, as you said, they doubled the amount that is in the game. I hope that CCP calls compressed gas liquefied gas, because that's what happens when you compress gas. It's liquefied. And I know that's like a small thing, like nothing really important hinges on that, but it would just make me happy from like a verisimilitude standpoint if they would call it liquefied gas. So CCP, please.
Okay, there you go. Liquefied gas, which makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, so if those, let's say it's halves in price or something, then you'll see like a, 400 million S drop or something on the price of a Nestor. So there you go.
Right now,
so that will be quite a lot.
Yeah. So right now we're running into an interesting thing with the faction ships, in that they can be bought off the loyalty point store, which is a different market entirely. It's all NPC based. And if you do missions for a certain side, you can buy their equipment for cheaper. And so there's two ways to get a faction ship. One is to just find it in the wild when you're shooting things, and it's, there's a loot drop. And then you have a BPC, a blueprint copy, and you take that blueprint copy and you manufacture it for the same price as a normal battleship or a normal ship of its size, but you get the bonus because you found the loot drop. And that used to be the loot drop way, used to be the way to get a cheap faction ship. But the build price has gone so high that now just buying it off the LP store is the better way to go.
Yep, certainly.
It's also more desirable to get the blueprint copy if you can help it, because you can move the blueprint copy to the place you want to build and then build there. But if you have a Nestor in HiSec, probably going to be staying in HiSec,
you have to fly it there. What a great point.
Yeah.
I didn't think of that.
Well, yes and no. So the point with building it now is that if you want to build it, then you need to do this entire production chain, which they made quite a bit more complex.
Yeah.
When you get it from the LP store, the LP store hasn't really been changed with the industry changes. So specifically something that like an Osprey Navy issue, I believe. Let me see if I can find it. So it's a very, very popular
by Navy, and there you go.
There we go. Osprey Navy issue. So if you look at that, then it says, okay, you need 115 million ISK in materials to buy it, for materials, but you can only sell it for 67 million ISK. And the reason for that is that actually people aren't building them. What they're doing instead is they get their LP from their fractional warfare and that sort of stuff, or for their level 4 missions. They turn in a normal Osprey hull, and then they turn it around into an Osprey Navy hull with the LP that they have, and they avoid this whole material stuff. And a similar story. I don't know entirely how it goes.
So there's absolutely no point in building a faction ship right now.
Well,
essentially not, no.
If you really, really want the compression effect, you might be willing to take a loss on the production cost, but you have to pay a pretty steep cost for that. I can't think of another use case for using a PPC of these.
Yeah, so it used to be that the expensive part of building a faction ship was the blueprint copy. For example, if you wanted to build a Nightmare, the Nightmare might have been 900 million ISK or something. You needed 600 million ISK for the blueprint copy and only 300 million ISK for the materials. Now those blueprint copies are essentially free because you're not going to build them for profit anyway because the materials are so high. And what you can also see is that for what is pretty interesting is if you look at the profits, for example, for Macarials and Balgorns, you can see that they are actually selling for quite a bit below their build cost. In the case of a Macarial, it's like something along the lines of half of the build cost. And the reason for that, again, is that either there's a lot of stockpiles of them still available because people used to use Balgorns and Macarials in very big scale nullsec wars, and they still have stockpiles of them. Or, I'm not entirely sure, but you might be able to get them from the LP stores as well if you live in the pirate areas. But I'm not entirely sure how that works.
I'm not sure off the top of my head either, but I know typically one of the better, the more expensive items that you can get in an LP store will be faction ships. Stands to reason.
Oh. All right.
So that's the story with faction ships. All the faction ships are really expensive, and it is mainly due to the gas, the known space gas, and the known space gas is probably going to change in value when compression starts becoming a thing.
I imagine CCP will see where that lands, with better ability to mine gas, with more gas out there. The faction prices come down enough to compete with the LP store. And if they don't, they'll probably make an adjustment somewhere else. Maybe they raise the price in the LP store.
The thing is, if a lot of this gas is coming from HiSec, then, it's not terribly difficult to move even very bulky things in HiSec. But if it has to come from wormhole space or from Null or another place like that, then that is a serious pain point because just from where I live in Null to Jita is about 100 million ISK worth of fuel for the round trip, and I move 150,000 cubic meters each way. I'm not moving gas on that kind of volume. I have to really think carefully about what to fill that jump freighter with.
But you will move liquid, right?
If they let me liquefy it, CCP, then maybe we'll bring these faction ship prices down. We'll see some more, player activity around that. But only, I cannot stress this enough, only if it is named liquefied natural gas.
Only, yeah.
If it's named compressed natural gas, then there's no telling what the possible ramifications could be.
Compressed air is like a compressed gas, isn't it?
Well, let's not overcomplicate things.
But I think when you have compressed air in a can, it's still liquefied. I think.
Is it?
Only
is
when
it
it comes out,
I think if you wiggle it, you can hear it in there. Okay.
You can feel it.
Rev, that sounds like you're really on top of things. I can tell.
Yeah. All right. You got anything else before we go? All right. We were going to talk about, and we don't have a lot of time, but we'll just mention this real quick, that the Winter Nexus is here. That's the event where you go out and you go into these ice storms and you fight these anomalies. It's a little tricky to get involved. They give you filaments, which are things that basically teleport you in, and then you find these sites to fight. That's the shorthand of it. We'll do a different show on how you get involved with that. But if you do that, some of the loot can be really lucrative. I think this is the event where CCP really delivers on the loot. So you want to get Overseer effects. That's the loot you're looking for, and that can be a very nice payday for you if you get out there.
I'm glad you brought that up, David. There is something about that I wanted to talk about. Can we
Okay.
go back to the market tab?
Yep. So let me know what to look up.
Okay, look up, type in RUBEDO. Yeah. Okay, go to the jacket. Okay, and can we expand the picture of this?
Apparel.
Yeah.
This is a new apparel item. They introduced a white version of this too, but they're basically just different colors of the 4.4 business executive jacket that was released when they overhauled Jita. Right, they released some apparel to celebrate. And there's been a CCP dev, I can't remember which one, but his profile pic on the official forums has, like, for the longest time shown him wearing this jacket, which was never in the game before. And the players, like, every once in a while, a player would post there, how can I get that jacket? It looks so cool, you know? So for this event, CCP has decided to put that in the game. There's another version of it called the Albedo Affluence, and which is in white. And there are women's versions of these too. And so these are part of the
Wow.
It's a pretty sharp looking, huh?
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm going to get a couple of copies for my characters, for their little passport photos or whatever.
I feel like any true businessman and Eve needs one.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are legitimately are good investments if you have a long-term perspective. Like if you type 4-4, it'll bring up the men's Jita executive jacket. This was released something like a year ago when they overhauled the station. And you can see that has consistently gone up because there were a finite number of them were introduced in the game at that time, and they haven't been reintroduced since. So, you know, that price is likely to continue up probably until it gets around $1 billion max, because, you know, people want nice clothes for their character. They'll pay. They don't really care about the cost for that. So that's something that you can invest in. This is not entirely related to the event, but it is also something going on right now. If you look up the Master at Arms accelerators.
Oh yeah. I was going to advise to buy a bunch of those before the Radiance ran out.
Yeah, this is a good thing to buy if you're looking for like a 4 or 6 month turnaround. I realized we were all saying 20 minutes ago that speculation is risky, don't do it.
Well, this is different. This is speculation with good insight, right? Everything else is ambiguous, but
yeah, so my instinctual aversion to speculation notwithstanding, I still think like this is a pretty solid buy. These things are typically 100 million-ish. They come from more or less. They come from Concord LP store. You get Concord LP by running incursions, and it's one of the main ways that incursion runners cash out their LP. But the reason that this price is down recently is because one of the packs that CCP just introduced, they're like Yule Beginner Celebration Pack or whatever for $15. The most recent one gives you 3 of these. So anybody who bought that pack now has 3 of them, and you know a lot of them probably rather have the 300 million ISK than the skill points.
So they're dumping them.
Yeah, so they just dump them. So
accelerators typically always go from newer players or the players that source them to the really high, wealthy, high SP older players. Because with skill injectors, you have the problem where if you want to skill inject into a high SP character, you're losing a lot of it. Yeah. But with these cerebral accelerators, they're just as good for a new person as they are for an older player with a lot of SP.
Technically, they're better for older players because you're getting better bang for your buck, right?
Yeah, like, exactly. Compared to skill injectors, for sure.
Yeah. If you pull up the attributes for that, it shows that you get a 10-point buff to all of your attributes, but it only lasts a day. This is very helpful if you're a high SP player because you have become hardened to skill injectors, right? And you don't get very much benefit out of them, but you do get more benefit out of the higher end accelerators are really the only way that you can efficiently make progress. But if you're a new player, you are way better off buying injectors than buying these like high grade accelerators. That's just on if you price out how much ISK you're paying per skill point, these are not a good thing to use until you're up to 50, 100 million, something like that. skill points.
Right.
So and that is a beginner's pack, right? So a lot
No
of
wonder
these
they're being
players
sold. Yeah.
cashing that out.
The smart move as a beginning player, if you buy that pack, is not to use those, but to sell those and use the ISK for other things, like maybe injectors.
That's right. You don't want to consume these if you're a new player. It kind of makes me wonder why they put it in that pack, to be
Probably to
honest.
sell. It's their way to deposit it into the game to get sold to lower the price. You can see there's spikes and valleys in this. The other reason that is low is because we just came off of there were replacements for this in the form of Radiant class boosters that did the same thing, except they improved your skill points by a bit less. And there were different types of those for different price points, but those expired and you cannot use them anymore as of the 7th, I believe. So anybody that was trying to use the bargain ones that were going to expire, that's all over. These things you can use anytime. They have no expiration date. But we've also just come into a new event. So I was looking to see if they were going to give out some accelerators as part of the event, and they didn't as far as login rewards. Therefore, this is still a good purchase if you wanted to get it.
The new event is dropping accelerators. Type in brain freeze, one word.
Okay, so these are going to be loot out in the wild, right?
Yeah.
They're not given away, but you can stumble upon them.
That's right. And these are typically pretty good investments. The potent brain freeze is the closest to the Concord accelerator, but it's still not quite as good. It's a hell of a lot cheaper, though.
It's +8. Is that right?
As you can see.
Yeah, +8. So it's almost as good, but it's like almost a third of price.
Right.
That was the same.
If you're typically using the Concord accelerators, the Master at Arms one, and then this the Radiance one has been out for the last couple of months, and now there's the Brain Freeze. Well, you switch over to the Potent accelerator, you get 80% of the effect for half the cost, and now you don't need the Master at Arms accelerators anymore, right? So that price suffers as a result.
Yeah, all these cerebral accelerators are really, really linked to each other in price. So right. if one new type becomes available with these events, then all of the similar ones will drop in price. And that's probably the moment you want to pick up some of the other ones that are more available for a longer term that won't expire, because they're probably then going to go back up in price later on when the event ends.
It's almost like eating seasonal vegetables, right?
So
enlightened me.
Look, if you look at the attributes for the
when strawberries are growing. That's what you eat. Go ahead.
So if you look at the attributes for the Brain Freeze one, it shows when it expires, which is, I think, early February.
Probably.
Yep. February. 8th of February.
Oh, February.
Right. So this event runs all through December until January 4th, and then there's another 4 or 5 weeks afterwards where you can use these. So if you have an accelerator right now, you have like 3 months almost in which to use it. So it's long lasting. It doesn't last forever, but because it's long lasting, it's also going to retain its value. Indeed, what's going to happen is during this event, a bunch of them are going to come into the market because people are getting them from these White Storm Nexus sites or whatever. And they'll take it to the market, they'll sell it to a buy order, and then somebody else, like me, will hoard them for a couple weeks, and then around mid-February we'll start releasing them, and they've about doubled in price by then, and so it's a good trade opportunity.
By then they'll have the Valentine's Day event. I believe that's the gala, right? Guardians Gala or whatever.
Yeah, so CCP has done this in the past. Like last year, the Halloween booster still had like a week of life left on them when the winter boosters came out. And I'm like, great, now I'm sitting on all of these Halloween boosters and their value is being destroyed by these new ones. I got to get rid of this, stuff. So there is risk associated with holding these for sure, but they're typically are a good item to trade.
Can you show me can you go to Radiance and show the market moves on that? Sorry, the market graphs.
I can tell you from memory, but it's not, that information isn't in the game.
It isn't. It climbs. If you look up Potent Radiance accelerator, you'll see that it climbs up in value, and then 2 days before it expires, it just drops like.
Right.
It's not on the market though. It looks.
They took it off the market. Oh, okay.
They took it off the market. The market data isn't there anymore. But I can just tell you from memory that at the low point of the Radiance accelerator thing, I was buying the extended ones for about 55 million, the basics for about 4 million. At the high point when I was selling them, I was selling the basic ones for about 12 million and the extended for about 110 million. And I actually didn't catch the crest of that wave. Briefly, when there was about a week left to go before they expired, JITA completely sold out of the extended accelerators, and they had to be reintroduced to the market, and they started at 150 million ISK for each one. So if you caught the crest of that wave, you could triple your ISK by waiting a month or two. So, I'm not really that into speculative trading, but these are a pretty good bet. You're not going to lose ISK probably.
Again, this is like farming. You have a vegetable or something that needs to make it to the market at a certain time, and it's going to spoil. So you don't want to hold on to them forever, but you've got to time it right to when there's not a surplus of that same vegetable at the market in order to get the best price for it. And that usually is kind of right near the end of the season. When everybody else's crops are running out, you want to usually, and farming is hitting, I don't know that much about farming except my family does a lot of farming, and they have to pick ahead of time what week or two they're aiming for with their product so they can land when they think there's going to be a shortage. And everybody else is doing the same thing. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So if you're buying them now, you can use them. You don't want to sell them right now. You want to just wait. As far as using them, the question always comes up with, Newbros asks, I got an accelerator from the event. Should I use it? Is it a good value? For the basic accelerators, the answer is almost always yes. These are like very cheap. It's something like, here I have the numbers. Let me just pull it up here.
It should be 8 to 12 probably.
So
they'll come down.
Currently
they're trending down. They start at 12 because that's what people remember. As they start flooding the market, the price will come down. They'll probably go as low as 8. Go ahead, Mal. I interrupted you.
So if you assume that a basic accelerator is worth 11 million ISK, then you're paying about 680 ISK per skill point, as opposed to 900 ISK through your Omega subscription and about 1,700 through a large skill injector. So as long as basic accelerators are on the market, they're by far the cheapest skill point that you can get. And really anybody who wants to do skill progression right now, even if you don't want to, splurge on the more expensive accelerator, there's no reason to not just keep chugging a basic accelerator every 2 days or however long it takes based on your biology skills.
All right, I'm going to cut you off. We're going to do a whole episode on this because it's really interesting stuff. Plus, you can increase the duration of that from 1 day. These basic ones are 1 day long to 2 days. We'll show you how to do that with implants and with a skill called biology. You want to get that up to 5. But we should go and do a whole show on this. I've got to cut the show now because we have to go, and it's getting really late for Rav over there, who is in Europe. But thanks very much, Mal. This is a good topic to get into. Okay, I want to thank you guys for coming, Mal Clips and Rav from RavWorks. Good to see you again. Always a pleasure. And thank you guys for hanging out with us here at Talking in Stations. We're going to send you over to Open Comps now. It's already in progress. You can hang out with them for the rest of the night. Thanks again, guys, for coming around. We will see you next time.